This episode is brought to you by BigMooseCoffeeCompany.co. Pals, greetings and welcome to another episode of Everything Endurance. Thank you very much for joining us again. Hope you've had a lovely week. First things first, we're only a couple of weeks away from when the team at Beyond the Ultimate and 70 runners would have been heading out into Kenya to do the For Rangers Ultra. 5 days of running through open wildlife conservancies, out in the open, surrounded by all the beautiful wildlife and scenery that there is out there. The sad thing about that being that is a race where all of the profits and any fundraising that goes alongside it goes directly into projects supported by Save the Rhino and For Rangers, that it all goes to benefit the welfare of the wildlife rangers that are out there across Africa and across the world, putting their lives on the line day in, day out to protect the remaining rhinos, elephants, and other wonderful creatures that are out there. At a time when they need us more than ever, we can't go over to them. So what we are going to be doing is the virtual For Rangers Ultra. That's right, you heard me, the virtual For Rangers Ultra. I'll make sure there's a link in the description of this podcast for anyone who's interested in getting involved. Or if you have a look on Beyond the Ultimate's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you'll find links to it all over the place. It's a 5-day event. And it's open to anyone, whatever your ability level is. So you can go out and commit to 5K a day across those 5 days if that's what you're going to be doing. That's what I'll be doing personally. I'm going to go out and run 5K every day across that time. Or you can do 10K, half marathon. Or if you're one of those ultra runners that's been out there with your races cancelled, but you've got it in your legs and you've been keeping up your training, you can do a full marathon a day. There'll be a league table, there'll be prizes for the winners, and the real thing is there'll be a real opportunity here to showcase and celebrate the good work that's been done by that race. And in the first 2 years of that race, we've raised over £250,000 that's all gone to benefit the Rangers, and we'll be able to give you live Q&As and videos and stuff that are going to show you what that's all about and the amazing stuff that's been achieved. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, look for that link, Virtual For Rangers Ultra. That's that bit out of the way. Now we're going to talk about today's guests. Today's guests are two of the founding members of blacktrailrunners, which is a community / movement that came together really as recently as early July. And they've come together in response to a very particular problem, which is trail running and a lot of outdoor sports in general. Mathematically, there is a definite, obvious underrepresentation of black runners, of any minority ethnic runner out there on the trails. We're going to talk today about why that might be, some of the reasons why that might be the case, and most importantly, we're going to have an honest conversation today about what can be done to make changes in that situation over time. We're going to be talking today to Sonny Peart, who's a well-known British ultra runner who's finished some really iconic races. We're also going to be talking to Marcus Brown, who is a Marathon Majors 6-star medal holder, and also, is there a cooler title you can hold in the world of running than that? I'm not sure there is. 6-star Marathon Majors medal holder. That sounds fantastic. He also presents his own running podcast. I'll ping a link to that down in the description as well so you can go and listen to it. It really is excellent stuff. I had a great time recording this episode. I could have listened to these guys all day, and it was a real learning and growing experience. I really hope it's going to be the same for all you guys listening to it. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that I know it is. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sonny and Marcus. Guys, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, Will. How about you?
Yeah, well, I'm very well. Thank you very much for asking. I have to say, I've been looking forward to this afternoon's conversation, but equally, I realised that the conversation we're going to have this afternoon isn't necessarily one where I'm going to be comfortable all the way through. There's no way of coming into the chat that I want to have with you guys without it being glaringly obvious that I'm a person who makes my living basically as a freelancer in the area of ultra running and adventure sports in general. And what we're going to be talking about really a lot today is how black athletes are represented in those sports. So I'm feeling quite laid bare as a middle-class, middle-aged white guy in the midst of all this. But that's very much the conversation I want to have today. I want to learn from you guys. I hope I hope it's going to make for an interesting chat.
We'll try.
Well, thanks, Sonny. I'd appreciate it. So having laid that on the line, before we drop into anything like that, what I do want to do, given it's the first time I've had you guys on the show, is talk a little bit about your backgrounds and how you came to be in the sport that you're in. Sonny, I knew your name a little more before this because I've just seen you around on the ultra running scene, and that's where I tend to spend a lot more of my time. So what kind of a runner are you, and how did you get into this sport?
So I would describe myself very much a middle of the pack runner. I'm too old to be any further forward than that these days. I came to running quite late. I've really only been doing long distance running for less than 10 years. Although I did run London Marathon in 2003, but that was kind of a one-off.
Are we not classing that as a long distance run? Because that seems offensive to Marcus.
I did it as a very, very inexperienced, I ran it terribly. It was just a typical newbies marathon, really. 2 hours to Tower Bridge, feeling great, rest of it, 3 and a bit hours. It was just horrible as the second half. So yeah, I don't really count that. So in my youth, I played football, I played cricket, in athletics, I ran the 100 meters, and so I hated long distance running, never ran further than 400 meters on a track, and tried to avoid cross country at all, if at all possible. And I think, just basically in my 40s, I sort of decided I was getting a bit too big for my clothes, and just sort of jumped on a treadmill, did a bit of running, and then went outside and pitched up to my local running club, and just got hooked basically, and gradually started running longer distances. I ran my first trail marathon in 2015, and thought, why do I run on the roads now? It was just so nice to run in the countryside. And as soon as you start thinking about that, then you can start looking at, then longer races kind of appear possible, I think. And I ran Race to the Stones later that year. That was my first ultra, a really good sort of entry-level ultra, if you like. Did the 2-day version. It was a great adventure. And then I've kind of not looked back, really. So last year I ran Centurion's 50-mile Grand Slam. So that's 4 50-mile races during the course of the year. And this year I'm doing their 100-mile Grand Slam, which has been obviously reorganized because of the pandemic. So it's much more concentrated than it was before. It would normally go from kind of April to late October, and now it's going from August to November. So the first one was 4 weeks ago, and the second one is the day after tomorrow.
It's your legs are taking a kicking this year.
Well, that could be the case. Yeah, I'm doing okay so far. So we'll see. Ask me next week how that's gone.
So when you sort of took to running again a little later in life in 2012, where were you based at that time?
I was in London. At the time I was working in a college in South London. And yeah, I'd been living in Harrow for quite a while. So a lot of the running that I did was suburban roads, our sort of typical local races, road races. But it's not that hard to, it's not that far to get out to the countryside. And there's a surprising amount of green space in London. I'm always quite surprised by how, if you find a high point in London and look over the city, certainly at this time of year, you see an awful lot of green. In fact, it just looks like a park, really, apart from a few kind of really tall buildings sticking out. The rest of it looks really green. And that's one of the things I quite like about London. It doesn't feel like, or lots of it don't feel like the sort of urban landscape that you get in, I don't know, some American cities, for example. So.
Yeah. I didn't mean to sound sort of surprised by that, but when you said that you started running in 2012 and then you ran this trail marathon in 2015, I guess coming from further north, coming from Sheffield, there's a real perception that if you're from London and you say you're a trail runner, like how can you possibly be? What trails are you talking about? But
yeah,
I mean
that race was in Sussex, which is not that far really. If I go to my if I go out my door, I can run a couple of miles and go up to Stanmore Hill, say. And from there, you can see all the way across London to the North Downs. It's not that far. I mean, really, in this country, nothing's that far, right? Really. So
no, we are spoiled. This is a small island, after all.
I could be in Sheffield in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I go for it. I'll get a pint in. So, Marcus, what about you? I have to say that one of the first things I saw on your website was, what is it, a 6-star marathon majors medal holder. Is there a cooler title you can hold in running? That sounds brilliant.
Well, it's not a self-appointed title, but
I wasn't accusing you of just like, I think this is what I'm going to call myself from now on.
So basically the World Marathon Majors, there's 6 races, and if you're fortunate enough to run them all, obviously now have been a bit problematic because of for the right reasons, then you get the medal. But so for me, I've been primarily focused on sort of road distances. That's how I started running. Started for a 10k from a bet from a friend. Then it kind of progressed from 10k halves up to the full marathon. Probably not done as many trails as some of yourselves, but I did the Marathon des Sables in Peru back in 2018. So that was my first experience of a trail, multi-stage ultra race.
No, fair enough. Obviously, I work with Beyond the Ultimate. We have a race in Peru. Some of our team were involved in that race as well. So, no, cool. It sounded absolutely awesome. But so you mentioned there, and this is so often the case, that there was a 10k early on there that was a bet. Is that where the running journey sort of begins for you? There's so many people whose running journeys seem to have begun with something they agreed to over a couple of beers and then regretted later on.
Yeah, I haven't regretted it, fortunately, which has been a good thing. Maybe during some training runs you do, but it's obviously short-lived. But I didn't really run during at school. I played football, a bit of rugby as well, but I wasn't really into running. And then I had a friend who ran like half marathons at university, and I was a bit like, why would you even think about running that far? He tried to convince me to run like a 5 or 10k. I had lots of excuses, and he found a race for me. And then, that's basically how it started for me.
The gradual diminishing of your base of excuses.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And you've done the MDS, the half MDS in Peru now. Are there any plans for you to take on any more ultras in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I want to do the full MDS. And there's some other races as well, like Spartathlon. I'd love to do that down the line. But at the minute, what I'm trying to do is trying to get my potential from the marathon distance and then work my way into ultras, because I find that sometimes people can rush it too quickly and lose the love and get injured. So I kind of really want to sort of take my time and enjoy it as much as you can. Enjoy doing a long distance run.
What do they call it? Type 2 fun.
Yeah.
Well, I like that as well. I enjoyed that when I had a look on your website, that you draw a lot of attention rather than, getting out there and talking about times and red zoning and stuff all the time. What you're talking about is, the wellness, the benefits that come from being involved in running over a long term. Is that something that's kept you involved in the sport?
Yeah, because when I first started running marathons, I was a lot slower than I am now. So I'm very mindful of paces and where people start. I mean, where you start is not where you finish. So that's not always the most important thing. And something I've learned as well, being around some elite athletes as well, is that they kind of think the same things as non-elite athletes. So that's the more interesting part, really. Sometimes if they're not feeling great, then they have an off run as well. So for me, it's looking about the person and sort of what unites people. That's what's more interesting than kind of what shoes you're wearing, what splits you're running, because we all experience the same thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that's, Sonny, I don't know if you'd agree with me here, but I think that's something that's true of the ultra running scene and at the running club level. When I first joined my first running club here in Sheffield, and I was just out there doing 5s and 10Ks and working up, it's that shared experience that you have initially, at least, that kept me going along. Have you been a member of a running club or anything like that, Marcus?
I have been, but it was very short-lived. And actually, something we discussed in our sort of Runners World feature recently, just about kind of not really seeing yourself represented as much, and they made me feel generally welcome. But I think when you're the only black guy there, it kind of creates another layer of sort of pressure. And I was getting coached separately, and what I found is that my sessions wouldn't really marry up with the sessions the club would do. So there's no point hammering a session on Tuesday, and then you've got to do a session on Wednesday. One's got to go. And for me, it was a running club. So yeah, it's mainly the coaching side, but obviously then the other side, which we discussed as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I read that Runners World article, and it was kind of what I was angling at there. That had you found at that initial time of coming into the sport that you felt welcomed, that you felt like you were in an environment where you felt you were supposed to be?
No. I mean, I felt like obviously the running side, yes, but obviously not welcomed as a member of the club. I mean, there were people that made me feel welcome, granted, but generally the feeling that I got was you kind of feel like on your own type thing. And people naturally, have unconscious biases anyway, so they naturally gravitate towards people that look like them, speak like them. And when you're one of the only black guys and one of the only people that have probably done the 6 World Marathon Majors, again, that sets you apart from everyone else, and it makes you kind of almost like a weird alien type thing. And you kind of like, look, I just want to run with you guys, forget about the other stuff. And sometimes other people don't look beyond that.
Yeah, weirdly, we were just talking before about the shared experience that all runners have and how that can draw the community together, but that doesn't seem to have crossed that line for you. And Sonny, how was your experience? You described sort of joining a running club when you started running again.
I was fortunate. I think the club I joined sounds very different to Marcus's club. It's very diverse in terms of age and ethnicity, and in terms of ability. So it kind of skews towards the recreational runner rather than the competitive runner. We've got a few pretty fast people, but a lot of people are, they're doing it for fun, they're doing it for fitness, they're doing it for the sort of the social aspect of it. It's a really very social club. So I've made sort of genuine friends in that club, and sort of very quickly it became a big part of my sort of weekly life, really. But I think part of what contributes to that is I live in Harrow, which is known for being one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, in terms of the sort of number of different nationalities who live here and the sort of general ethnic spread. So in a way, it's not a surprise that a local running club would be pretty sort of inclusive in that way. So yeah, I absolutely understand where Marcus is coming from there, but I'm lucky I'm in a club which is not like that.
Good. Now, I'm glad to hear it. But what led from that point then to you getting into trail running and getting into ultra running, getting into those distances? Because I realize here, where I'm coming from with asking that question is, you know, I've worked on quite a lot of high profile races over the last few years, and I can't recall a time where I've ever needed more than one hand to count the non-white runners in the field on the ultra races that I cover. So who were the figures that were sort of drawing you towards it? What was your journey into ultra running?
Yeah, so I think, well, I first started running sort of longer distances. Well, no, let me take a step back. So the club organises lots of kind of races itself and has sort of competitive events on a fairly regular basis, and they have what the club calls a trophy competition, which encompasses like a dozen races across the year. And so that sort of encouraged me to start running, you know, beyond 5k to 5 miles, 10k, half marathons. And you know, even though I dismissed my 2003 London adventure, you know, that was in the back of my head. I had done it, so you know, the thought of doing a half marathon and then beyond that wasn't scary for me. I knew that I was able to do it. And then sort of in my life, what was going on? My mother got really ill with a sort of fairly rare condition, and as part of sort of dealing with that, I decided that I would run a marathon and raise money for the charity that dealt with that particular disease. And they were based in Edinburgh, a charity called Myeloma UK, and they, as an Edinburgh-based charity, a fairly small charity, they had places in the Edinburgh Marathon, and so I chose to run that, and that gave me the impetus to, you know, run a marathon, and I actually really enjoyed it. I trained properly for it, unlike the one that I'd done previously. You know, ran a respectable time, and thought, well, actually, I wouldn't mind doing some more of this. And then the following year, one of my club mates at Metro's, the club that I'm a member of, she was running ultras, and she ran some ultras in Scotland, and then she was running a trail marathon in Sussex, and I think she just put out a note, you know, a message to the club saying, I'm doing this, does anyone else want to do it? And I thought, why not? You know, it looks like fun, so I decided to do it, and we ran it together, and you know, and it was a real revelation to me. You know, 26 miles through the countryside. You know, it was beautiful. You know, if anyone wants to run that marathon, it's still going on these days. The Wheeled, in fact, they don't do a marathon version now; they just do an ultra and a half marathon. But the Wheeled Challenge is a really great race. And yeah, so that's kind of how I sort of got into that. And as I say, after that, I kind of was just looking around for more races like that to do. And when you start doing that, you start seeing longer and longer races. And I think the race to the Stones was just starting, or it'd been going like 2 or 3 years maybe at that point. So you know, it was still relatively low key in a way. You know, these days, if you speak to anyone in running, they've probably heard of it, but in those days that wasn't the case. But they had some great marketing, and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, that looks really cool. And another friend of mine decided that he wanted to do it as well, so again we ran it together. And I think that's quite an important thing, that having at least one other person who's willing to do the same thing or wants to do the same thing, you know, can be a real benefit and sort of be a real sort of part of the motivation. I mean, I'm used to being the kind of only person or the only black person in the room in many situations. You know, I was the only black person in my school when I went there. I was the only black person in my college or university. You know, I've been in many workplaces where I'm the only black person. So that's not a new experience, but it's not necessarily one that, you know, you want to keep repeating if you don't have to. So yeah, so having at least one other person, an ally with you, can be, you know, can make those things easier. I mean, I'm not going to overstress the point. You know, I'm no kind of shrinking violet. I'm pretty confident, and you know, I can, you know, I'm confident enough to handle situations where, you know, I wouldn't automatically fit in. You know, I feel fairly adaptable as well. But you know, anything that makes it a little bit more comfortable is a good thing. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, really, and I think that continues to be the case. There are some things which new challenges which I would like to do, and it's always good if you've got someone else who can go along with you, really, and kind of, particularly if that's someone who kind of knows the ropes and they've done it before. Sometimes you explore it and learn it together, but sometimes it's really good to have someone else who's actually been there and done it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did my very first ultra marathon completely on my own, and it was a horribly intimidating experience. I wished I'd taken an ally along. But yeah, you talk there about it's useful to have allies, and we've struck upon the fact there that there must be quite a few ultra races you've done where you are the only black competitor in the field. So and that seems to be the case in trail running in total, which seems to bring us quite succinctly to Black Trail Runners, of which you, Sonny, and Marcus, you as well, are two of the founders. So what's the story behind Black Trail Runners? When did this start? When did the idea first come up for you?
I think, well, for me, certainly, it was when I was actually asked to go on another podcast by James Elson, the race director at Centurion Running, because this has obviously struck him that across all of their races, he could count on one hand the number of black runners. And so he reached out to me and said, is that something that you'd be willing to talk about? And this was on the back of the sort of most recent sort of emergence of Black Lives Matter. It's been around for a while, but with the death of George Floyd, it became much more prominent. And so I agreed to sort of do that with James, and it actually made me think about this much more than I had previously, because, as I say, I'm used to it being like that, and in many cases I just kind of don't necessarily question it. That's just the way things are. And in a race like that, I know I don't see everybody. I'm somewhere in the middle. For all I know, there could be 5 people at the front who all look like me and they're winning the race, but I never see them. But it appeared from what Jay told me that wasn't the case, and that I actually was in many cases the only one. And so it made me start to think about why that would be, and I think that's really to me the question at the heart of what we're trying to do, which is why aren't there more black trail runners? Because there's no question that we are underrepresented.
Absolutely. There was a stat that I pulled from when I was looking at your Instagram earlier, and one of the things that really struck me was that 1% of visitors to UK national parks are not white. That 1%, yeah. Which is it's stunning, really, when you put it in that kind of perspective. And I meant what I said earlier on. I've never needed more than one hand to count like non-white runners on any of the races that I've been involved with, which is just shocking.
Yeah. So when you sort of put that against the fact that in the UK population, it is roughly 18% non-white, and within that 18%, 3% of that is black, and that's more black than me. So in a race of 500 people, there should be a dozen, more than a dozen black runners.
Mathematically, we can see here that something's gone wrong.
Yeah, so the question becomes, the question isn't, are they underrepresented? The question is, why are they underrepresented? What's actually going on? And it seems fairly clear that it's not a lack of interest in running. It's not a lack of ability in running, because we know that in many aspects of running, black people are well overrepresented. If you look at professional marathon runners, they're overrepresented. So what is it that's going on? And that's where that to me is what's prompted us to set up this group to try and help answer that question, but also address the issues that emerge from those answers. So yeah, Marcus, I'm sure you want to add to that, but
yeah, I was about to ask. So, Marcus, I'd like to know what your involvement has been, sort of how you came to be involved in this. But equally, I guess you're coming from a different area of running to what me and Sonny are maybe discussing here. You're coming from marathon running, where, as Sonny's just said, like that's a sport that's been dominated by black runners for the last few years. Has that affected your experience? Have you found that you are in less of a minority as a consequence of that?
I think the experience I spoke about with my running club probably shows that it's not. And when you look at the elite athletes, for example, no respect, I can't really relate to Eliud Kipchoge because I don't live in that part of the world. So the runners that I see, even my daily runs or the races that I run in, are typically white. So again, it's people will argue like, yeah, you'll see black athletes at the elite levels of sort of athletics and marathon and things like that, but they're not people that I interact with, not because I go out of my way not to interact with them, but just because of, as I think Sonny sort of described really about, obviously population wise, I think it's not always possible in that sort of way. But you'd like to think so, especially being more in London, but it's just not the case really. How do I get involved? Well, I know some of the other members, and I think we were talking about it. I think with the death, particularly of Ahmad Aubrey, that was a real trigger because for someone like myself, I mean, I run for freedom, you know what I mean? Because it's a sense of freedom, there's an adventure. And then sort of seeing that was basically a reminder that a little dent into that little bubble, really. Not that I lived in a bubble, if that makes sense, but these kind of events really kind of snowballed. And as a parent as well, you sort of think, well, what can I do next, really? What, just because it doesn't directly affect me or it might affect me, should I sort of do nothing? So it's good to sort of, I think these things happen by fate, really, and good to sort of meet with the rest of the group. And we got together, and even though I don't run as many sort of ultras as some of the other guys, but I still run in trails, even my training runs. I still feel it's the overall picture, really, just to get representation. I think when we look at running, it generally is normalized as being a white, seen as white. And the issue that we have is that we want to see it as more representation, which I mean, just more diversity. And I think that's if it was really the case that there was more diversity, more representation, and that old line, all lives matter, then this club, this association, this organization wouldn't exist, because if everyone be seen as equal. But the fact that it's not is the reason why we exist, just to make it a normal part of the conversation, not to be separatist. I mean, I could go on, but I'm sort of conscious I'm sort of going beyond your question.
Oh no, that's quite all right. You go for it. But it's an interesting word you brought up there when you said about it being separatist. That you must have been faced with at least some people raising that as an issue. That surely, surely it should be all trail runners, not black trail runners. And I roll my eyes internally just saying that sentence. But surely the maths doesn't bear up there. As we were just saying with Sonny, if there wasn't already a problem there, then there wouldn't be a need for an organization like Black Trail Runners. The problem is obvious and obviously is there.
Yeah.
So when did you really get this off the ground then? Because that's been very quick. Sonny, you're talking about a podcast appearance there that you only did, that must have been early June, I would guess.
I think it's actually late June. I mean, we're talking 2 months. The group started in July. It seems like a long time already, but yeah, it's been pretty rapid. What happened was that I think myself and Sabrina kind of had after I'd done that podcast, a few people reached out to me. That was what was quite interesting. So I had a number of people who contacted me who kind of fell into two categories. They were either other black runners who had been having the same thoughts and thinking, what can we do about this? Or they were white runners who were, wow, I hadn't even thought about this. This hadn't, you've opened my eyes to an issue which I hadn't realized was an issue. So, that kind of, those two categories made it seem as though, well, actually, that's part of the problem, that a lot of the people don't see it as an issue. They haven't seen it. And if we've got a group of us who do see it and feel we want to do something about it, then this seems like a really good time to do that, because people's awareness of it was being heightened because of what was going on in the wider world, and as well as that, sort of major organizations were sort of all sitting up and taking notice as well, which kind of felt as though it would give us some leverage as we sort of try to get this underway. So Sabrina and I just basically said, okay, let's, who do we know who might also want to be involved? And I think I contacted you, Marcus, I can't remember, or maybe it was Sabrina or one of Sabrina's friends. But anyway, we managed to get a group of 8 of us together, and happily we all have fairly similar ideas about what we should be doing and how we can do it, and so far we've been working together pretty well. I think we have quite I think it's been enjoyable actually doing it, and I think that in itself is quite important, because we've been able to support each other in a situation where you do have difficult conversations and it can feel quite stressful, and emotionally difficult. I remember when we Sabrina and I appeared on the Runners World podcast about a month ago, and when it went live on Runners World's social media, within minutes of it going on there were already sort of antagonistic posts being put on by people saying, why on earth is Runners World looking at this as an issue? What's the problem? Anyone can run on the trails. Stop being so woke. And quite belligerent, but equally quite clearly fairly ignorant in that they clearly hadn't listened to the podcast, because they were posting, it was like an hour and a half long, and and they were posting within minutes of this going live. So they clearly hadn't listened to it. But as being someone who's in the podcast, it's quite difficult to not feel that as a personal attack. And so it's actually really good that you've got sort of allies and friends around you who absolutely understand where you're coming from, and so in our own sort of WhatsApp group, we're like, okay, see that comment, we can kind of laugh at those things ourselves, and kind of we can ground ourselves and reassure ourselves that we haven't made some terrible mistake here, and that our experiences are actually valid here. So I think that's quite an important aspect, and that's kind of sort of gone over into the way that we tried to design the group as well. So I think it's quite important that it is both a community and a campaigning group. So it's a campaigning group in that we think there are things that we can do in order to change and improve the situation. But it's a community in that it also provides a safe space for Black people to investigate, talk about, celebrate running and running on trails, in a space where they're not going to be attacked by people who really don't understand or choose not to understand the issues that they're facing. And I absolutely understand why that's important. I've in the last few weeks I've lost people who I'd consider to be friends because they simply refuse to get it at all, and literally will just shut you down and just deny what you're experiencing, and that's not it's not limited to running by any stretch of the imagination. You know, that's part of the whole sort of, you know, race relations in the world, really. But for you know, every time that happens, you know, that's a real personal thing going on, and you know, it's kind of tiring, and it's wearing, and so, you know, it's really important to try and hold on to the positive aspects of what we're doing, and it's good to have, and it's really important to have a space, whether it's on our Facebook group, which is a closed group for members, or, you know, in our sort of committee discussions within the group, where you know that you can talk about this stuff, and you're not, you know, people aren't going to deny that it's going on. They're not going to laugh at you. They're not going to attack you, and you know, you can be yourself in a way that in many public forums you simply can't. You know, you only have to, you know, log on to Twitter and either say something vaguely controversial as a person of color, or follow someone who is, you know, black and opinionated, and you'll see what kind of responses come out of the woodwork. Well, in fact, not even out of the woodwork, just out in plain sight. You know, on a, you know, immediately. You know, I think one of the issues, or you know, one of the things that I think about a lot is, or one of the things that people talk about a lot is whether sort of the issue of race and racism has improved or gotten worse, you know, over time or whatever. And I think there's an assumption that things have got better. And for many people, the assumption is that they got better to the point where there isn't really a problem anymore. And, you know, personally, I find that, you know, frankly, laughable. And you know, I'd say, you know, if I looked at a kind of 50-year time frame, I'd say, yeah, things have got better. You know, guess what? Black people in America can vote now. They couldn't vote until the 1960s. You know, we have race equality laws in the UK, which we didn't then. But so overt discrimination has become less normalised, but systematic racism hasn't gone away at all. And in fact, if we look at the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, overt discrimination has got worse. Remember, this is, you know, just last week, we literally had flag-waving fascists in Trafalgar Square. You know, that's, you know, we haven't seen that since the 1930s. I mean, that's, you know, to me, that's incredible. And, you know, not just, you know, brazenly doing it, but appearing to be fairly unchallenged by, you know, the authorities. You know, I mean, I work, you know, all of, you know, half a mile from there on the Strand, you know, when I actually am allowed to go to the office. I'm supposed to walk through Trafalgar Square where there's literally fascists waving their flags. You know, that's not a post-racial society at all.
I think, in a way, and I'm sorry to interrupt you in full flow there, that just reminded me of something that happened not too long ago, which was a small right-wing political group based not too far away from I am, went up into the Peak District National Park onto the top of Mamtor, like this really, really well-known spot, somewhere where I've been running and hiking. Yeah, a beautiful spot.
In fact, I'm running up there in a few weeks.
Yeah. Well, I might have to see you out there, but yeah, they held up a huge All Lives Matter banner on the top of the hill in the middle of the Peak District National Park, and shared it around on social media, and Twitter was briefly alight with it one morning. I was furious. But those kind of groups seem to be able to operate quite openly without other people even realizing that they're there. My Facebook and Twitter have become an echo chamber where I only see the opinions of people that I choose to interact with, and they're all the opinions of people who have opinions like mine. So I guess that kind of overt racism.
Sorry, well, I don't know if you've seen the film The 13th, and it basically explains like how systemic racism works in the States, but obviously it's applicable to the UK as well, and how racism has become, it's still there, but it changes forms. So like when we talk about stuff like All Lives Matter, it's still, the undercurrent message is still there, but they've just made it appear in a way that it seems like, oh, okay, well, everyone can sort of get onto that. And I think, just jumping onto what Sonny said, I think one of the main issues today is that we've got sort of different camps. So people looking to be like, okay, there's a racist and there's not racist. I'm not racist. Okay, well, that's still not a great place to be, because people look at the racism in terms of like, oh, name calling, flag burning, mob mentality, overt racism, which isn't always the case. It is some places, obviously we've seen in the States recently, but not all. You don't see that all the time. I think the real issue, and what people don't really get involved with, is being an anti-racist. An anti-racist is like, you see something happening, you call it out, you make a joke. You don't just sort of laugh along and carry on. I mean, if it's offensive, it's offensive. So I think there's different sort of tiers, and racism does and has changed form from day dot to now, really.
Absolutely. And I think I get the distinction you're making there between the kind of overt racism where you are slinging racial slurs at people, to the kind of institutionalized racism that is set in. I am I hate to reiterate this, middle-class, middle-aged white guy from a northern mining village. Like my own, there is almost certainly subconscious bias in me that I still need to dismantle and actively go looking for, because that is what my background is, and it's very, very narrow. And I think people are only now starting to wake up to the fact that you need to have that conversation with yourself. That you may,
like that. Yeah.
I
mean,
you don't
perfect.
get to just say, I'm not a racist. That's fine. I'll close this box now. There's still a conversation to have.
Yeah, I think everyone has biases, though, to be honest. I think, like, especially when you talk about even discrimination against women, harassment, and when they're running, just because as a man I've not experienced it doesn't mean it's not happened. And when we get some of the dismissive comments, like what Sonny was talking about on the run as well, I go out running and people can get tickets. It's like we've been saying, it's me saying to a woman, like, I've not been harassed, it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist to someone else. We, as being like good human citizens, we should listen to other people and just take it on board and see where we can help, rather than kind of dismissing it and not, like we say, racist, not racist, be an anti-racist or be an anti-sexist or whatever.
Yeah, I think I quite enjoyed your description of yourself as sort of white middle-aged man from a Yorkshire mining village, because it highlights to me that I'm a black middle-aged middle-class man from a Yorkshire mining village. That's where I spent the early years of my life, and so my experience in terms of what was around me would have been very much the same as what you had. We would have experienced it in different ways, but it was happening. So, I'll be quite frank about it. Growing up in 1970s Yorkshire as a black child in a mining village, was not a harassment-free zone by any stretch of the imagination. I would have been, was called all kinds of names, on just a regular basis. I was very much an oddity and, the odd one out in that situation. And, 1970s, discrimination was entirely normalized. This is the time when, the only appearance of race on TV was, Love Thy Neighbor, pretty crass ITV comedy of, two families living next door to each other, calling each other names, basically. So, I not only did everybody go through that and experience that and kind of internalize it and normalize it, of course I did as well. So, one of the points that I've tried to make is that, those biases that Marcus talks about, they don't just exist in the heads of white people, they exist in the heads of everybody, because we're all part of the same society that has those same images projected at us. So, I have them, you have them, everybody has them. There are some great, there were some I think they're from Harvard University, and anyone can take them online, that look at unconscious biases on a range of different factors, so race, weight, gender, all kinds of things. And you take this test at your computer, and I think millions of people have taken the test around the world, and you can see what your results are and see how they fit into everybody else's. And what it shows is that if you look at the race one, is that effectively it's using your perception of race against characteristics which you would consider to be good or bad. And it kind of measures your reaction times to kind of see how well you associate one with, white people or black people or whatever. And what it shows is that across the world, a majority of people basically associate black people with bad characteristics more than they associate them with good characteristics, and vice versa for white people. And what's kind of shocking about it, because that doesn't particularly shock me, is that if you just look at black people, that's true as well. So black people have a negative image of black people. And you've got to ask yourself, well, why would that be? Well, that's because our image of each other is not purely based on our own self. Yes, you have your personal environment that you live in. If you grow up in a black family, you're surrounded by people who are black, who love you and you respect them, etc., etc. But the outside world still intrudes on your experience. You still watch TV, you see films, you read books, you look at your built environment around you. Where do people live? What jobs do they do? And who's in positions of authority and who isn't? And you take those things on board, and so you form these views, and you do that without even realizing it, of course. That's why we're calling them unconscious biases. But what that means is that it's really hard for people to acknowledge that those things are there, because it makes you feel as though you're a bad person. And no one wants to be called a bad person. I think we're, apart from the overt, racists, most people think that racism is bad. And they don't, given the choice, they want to be in the good box, not in the bad racist box. And so when someone says to them, you've got, that you think that black people are less worthy than white people, it's like you're being put in the racist box, and they don't see themselves in the racist box at all. They don't want to be there. And so they'll deny that that's the case. But of course, that's not what we're saying. That's not what anyone's saying. What we're saying is that all of us live in a system which is kind of in the racist box. Some of us realize that we're in that box, and are able to, kind of claw our way out of it, if you like. But no one just exists separately from it. You can't. It's not possible. But that's part of the challenge of what groups like ours are trying to do, because however we frame the argument, it's quite difficult for people not to feel like it's an attack on them, that we're saying they're bad, and we're not. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that black people are being excluded by racist event directors who refuse to let them in. That's clearly nonsense. But are there structures in society which make it harder for certain people to do things than others? Yes, there are. What's the appropriate response to that shouldn't be there isn't an issue, or I'm not part of the problem. The appropriate response to that should be, well, clearly there is an issue. What can I do about it, and how can I help resolve it?
And I see what you're saying there. That you what you face there is immediately the people that you want to have this conversation with are feeling like they need to defend themselves, and whereas it actually, these kind of uncomfortable conversations, they may very well be uncomfortable, are just going to have to be had. And Marcus, actually, I think it was something you said that, the uncomfortable conversations need to be had, and that's where you're going to get progress. Progress comes from the sessions that hurt, is I think the way you put it. You made a running analogy out of it, that you are going to make good progress in those sessions that are difficult.
Yeah, I'm glad I got a running pun in there, to be honest. So I think my work here is done, to be honest. But yeah,
I'm just glad I got to crowbar that quote in. That's the only one I'd written down in my notebook.
But I think it goes back to like what we said before about working to be an anti-racist. I mean, like no one wants to be seen as a bad person or not racist or anything like that, or maybe they choose to. But what we're looking to do, and is obviously work towards that sort of that stage of being an anti-racist, working on going through those sort of difficult conversations. Because probably this year, I mean, I've spoken about race more than I have probably in my entire life, really. It's not something I really want to go into, but it's a necessary conversation, and it's like a training session. And once you get through the first part, you're going to get to the end. It's not, you won't die. Life will go on, and actually you find there's a lot of common ground, really. But ultimately, you don't know what you don't know. You have to be open to not knowing, and just sort of suspending your kind of own disbelief and your feelings towards things, and just having that sort of conversation. And it's like, the all lives matter debate. I mean, like I've probably said it so many times before, but if that really was the case, then we wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So
there you go. It's self-defeating in that sense.
Yeah.
If that was true, then we wouldn't be having the conversation in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm sort of keen to bring this back around to running again a little bit. I guess given that that's the theme of my podcast overall, we're kind of trapped into doing that. And currently, I realise, this is only early days for the Black Trail Runners group. You're just sort of building your website at the moment. But what you have got up there is a kind of open letter almost to race organisers. Working on the assumption that not everyone listening to this is going to have gone out and read that, although I do recommend that they do. Let's look at that. So what are you saying to race organisers, and what do you think, and God, this is a really big question, but what do you think has got wrong, and what can we do to make things better going forwards? Get more black and minority ethnic people out onto the trails.
Yeah, I think so. As I said, it was really important to us that the group was a campaigning group, not just a kind of talking club for black runners. And we identified fairly early that there were some things that could fairly easily change in the running or the trail running community. And I guess we were looking at so the three things that we think definitely can change are sort of the rate of participation, so getting more people doing it, but that's affected by representation. So in the media, in imagery around the sport, do black people see people who look like them? And clearly they don't, not very much. And then this concept of inclusivity, which I'll come back to because I think it's kind of widely misunderstood. But just in terms of participation, we've felt that an early kind of quick win, if you like, would be to kind of quantify the problem. As we sort of hinted at earlier, there are still loads of people out there who will say there isn't a problem. What are you talking about? So we wanted to be able to sort of knock that on the head, and for our own benefit as well. Actually be sure that we aren't just imagining this in some way, because we've got our own personal experience, and one of the things that one of the questions that we would ask and people would ask us is, well, how many black runners are there in trail running? And no one can answer the question because no one collects that information. So the first the subject of that open letter was the sort of first campaign request, if you like, and we did send it directly to something like 40 different event companies, as well as publishing it publicly as well. Was basically to say, as far as we know, you don't collect this data. Can you please start doing that? That's what employers do as part of their work to improve diversity in the workplace. It's clearly something that's possible to do. And once we do that, then we've got, not only have we quantified the issue, but we've got a kind of baseline to work on, and then we can see if and how much progress we can make. We we got a pretty good response to that immediately, from from a fair number of events and race organisers, including many who we hadn't actually contacted. They found out about it and they got in touch with us, and not just in the UK but around the world as well. We're talking to companies in America, in Canada. It's an issue not just in the UK, and in fact, this is fairly timely, I think, because this week we actually got our first tranche of data back as a result of that. It's just from one event, which is happening next year, but they've taken entries, the event's fully booked, and they let us have the overview of their ethnicity data. And we were just talking about it in our group yesterday. We had a little sweepstake on how many black runners were in that race, given that data. And the answer was basically, well, depending on how you count it, the answer was either 0 or 2.
Wow.
And that's in a race of more than 300 people.
Wow.
So what we've asked races to do is to use the standard Office of National Statistics categories for ethnicity. There are 18 of them, and they're grouped into 4 groups. And the 4 groups are white, black, Asian, and mixed race. So if you just took the black category, there are no black runners in that race. There are 2 mixed race African/Caribbean runners. What's really shocking is that both of those mixed race African Caribbean runners are founders of Black Trail Runners.
Oh, wow.
So this is how acute the problem is.
That's cheating in the sweepstake, though, I have to say.
Yeah. Neither of us got. Well, I got it right because I was the first one who got the data, but the other person, she knew she was in there, but she didn't know that I had entered. So it was, we don't want to over-interpret this or make it, get too much out of it. It's one race. It doesn't represent the whole world of trail running, but it's immediately starting to reinforce our position. But most importantly, what it's doing is making it clear that it's possible and actually quite straightforward to collect this information. Of the entrants to that race, only 5 people said that they would prefer not to say what their ethnicity was. That tells us that runners are willing to do it. If races are willing to do it as well, as many of them are, then it's really not difficult to get this information. And once we've got it, that now gives us something to work on. So to us, that was a really important first step. Then, the sort of next aspects of our campaign will be around asking people to increase representation. Part of the issue there is you've got a kind of chicken and egg thing. That if you look at magazines, if you look at websites of races, etc., they show you the races as they are, not the races as you would like them to be necessarily. And so they're just full of white middle-aged blokes mostly, with some white middle-aged women as well. That's because that's who runs those races now. But if that's what you keep presenting, well, every black person who looks on those websites or looks at those magazine covers is like, well, is that for me? Not sure that it is. That's not welcoming them into the sport. And it's, that's where you start getting into this idea of inclusivity. It's not that anyone's saying, no, don't join, get away, don't come in our sports. But, that's not being inclusive. That's just being tolerant in a way. That's a pretty low bar. It's a bit like sort of saying, okay, there's a party. I haven't invited you to the party, but if you turn up, you're welcome. That's not inclusivity.
No, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
That's one of the things that we do. But then it's also about giving people access and providing them with the skills to do this as well. Access in terms of some of it's to do with economics, some of it's to do with geography. So we know that 90% of black people live in urban centres in the UK. So they're not living on the trails. They don't live in the Cotswolds. They don't live on the Sussex Downs. You've got to travel to get to those places, and that's not necessarily easy. Equally, we know that from a socio-economic point of view, on average, black people have less money than white people in the UK. So that clearly doesn't affect everybody, but on average, that's part of the issue. And for all that people say that running is a very pure, simple sport, that's just nonsense when it comes to the trails and when it comes to ultra running. You can't just whack on a pair of Dunlop Green Flash and a pair of sports trousers and hit the trails. That would be silly and irresponsible and not very effective. Particularly if you want to be competitive.
And this is a fair point. There's a perception that in running, all you need is a pair of running shoes and you can get involved. That's why it's such an inclusive sport. I don't know if you've seen the mandatory kit list for most ultramarathons, but that's just absolutely not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm spending the whole week packing for my race. That's like,
yes, I bet. Yeah,
and that's apart from having to pay to enter the thing. So it's So there's that issue as well. And then it's about sort of skills as well, because if you're not used to being in the country, if you're not used to being on the trails, you don't necessarily know what to do. Can you read a map? Can you read a compass? Do you know how to run up a really steep hill that's full of tree roots and stuff like that? What do you do when it gets dark? What do you do? What do you carry stuff in? What do you need to carry? All of these things are questions. They're not impossible questions, but it's stuff that people actually really need to learn, and someone's got to help you learn those things. And so, part of what we are going to be doing, starting to do as a group, is help with that as well. So offer taster days, offer kind of mentoring and coaching that make it possible for people to say, well, okay, you've removed some of the hurdles and the barriers that might stop me doing this. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to do it.
Fantastic.
I'm conscious that I'm just talking and talking.
Sonny, and I'm sorry, Marcus, if you're feeling a bit hard done by here, but I'm happy to just let you roll when you're talking like this, because this is incredibly important and interesting stuff.
Can I just add one point to what Sonny just said?
Oh, if you must, Marcus.
It's okay. It's being a podcast and all speak and everything. I think I completely agree with what Sonny said.
Is that Marcus and I sound the same, so even though he's talking, I could still pretend it's me. So that's right.
Oh my gosh. So one of the main issues, well, like we talked about obviously kit as well, and I don't think that we've obviously said that it's not just about giving someone places and kit and things like that. It's also about the community aspect as well, and something that we're finding. Obviously, we can still do stuff in London or whatever urban areas that you live in. Is to try and sort of build that community first and skill together, and then look at the ways where you can sort of go outside to different areas, because you can't just say, here's a race entry, here's some shoes, no, go run, as Sonny said. So I think we're looking at that side as well. I think the community aspect is important.
How do you see is the representation issue different while you're out road running, Marcus, while you're involved in marathon running? Because I'm just listening here to the ultra marathons are often much more expensive, and there's a huge amount of kit. And as Sonny said, like, my navin isn't fantastic, but I've been able to nip out to the Peak District, which is close to me, and do some navigation courses. That still wouldn't be enough to get me through quite a lot of the sort of unmarked ultra marathons that are out there. At marathon level, it's you and the road a lot of the time. Is the representation issue still as severe?
Well, in some aspects. I mean, when I did MDS, again, didn't see many people like myself, but obviously the locals in Peru. But when I was doing it, I wasn't really thinking about me being one of the few, to be honest. And also the same for the World Marathon Majors, as we touched upon before. I've made a lot of friends and traveled to a lot of places. But when I look back at all the photos, I'm like, I'm the only black guy there. So I guess there is another issue there. I mean, especially if you go race in the States, it's several £100s for a race entry, then flights, hotels. I mean, the time you spent like it's a ridiculous £100 on a silly polyester race jacket, all that kind of stuff. You're really sort of really getting into kind of serious money. So I guess there is that sort of side as well from marathon side. Obviously, that's when you're traveling abroad, but obviously you can still run marathons here in the UK. But I mean, for what I would say is that most of my training, because I've got a coach, I train solo. So for me, it's not really an issue of whether I'm training with this person, I see this person or not. It's more about who you see when you're out at races. And yeah, again, it's mostly white, but that doesn't really put me off from running. And it's not until probably the recent sort of conversations that we're having that makes you think, oh, okay, well, is this a problem as well? It definitely is a problem in other ways, but I think what the argument would say with road running is it's a little bit more accessible, especially in the urban areas. Whereas if you're going to go trail running, again, you're going to be an oddity if you just sort of go outside by yourself and you're wherever. So that's why it kind of needs a bit of work, as well as Sonny sort of mentioned, and the community aspect is so important. Like I said, you can't just give people like just tickets and kit and let them go by themselves. I think what we sort of find, we're trying to build something as well, and I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, agreed. And there was something you struck on a minute ago, Sonny, that I just wanted to come back to quickly, which was where you said that in terms of how the races are represented, what race organisers need to do more is to show the race as they want it to be, rather than showing the race as it is. And that's something that's really struck a chord with me, because I can't imagine when you were first getting into trail and ultra running that you saw a lot of black people represented in the advertising for these races, in the promo videos or the photos that were out there.
No. I can't consciously remember that point, but I'm almost certain that that is the case. What I do know is that when I actually started consciously looking at it earlier this year, I literally looked at the websites of all of the race companies that I had done ultras with, and I managed to find one picture of a black person, and it wasn't a good one. So there really is a lack of representation. Now, what's quite interesting, I think, is that there's been a real shift in the last 2 months on this. We've seen a lot of events, particularly brands, so manufacturers and media companies. What they're choosing, the models that they're choosing to use now, are very different. What's going to be interesting is how long that lasts. Is this a permanent shift, or is this just a reaction to the current trend? So one of the prompts for us doing this was that Sabrina, one of our co-founders, she had written to Runner's World because she knew that over the years they had very few black athletes featured, particularly on the cover. But just this year, I think it was June or July, they had a black runner on the cover. So it kind of coincided with the whole sort of Black Lives Matter resurgence. But when she looked at that cover, she found that actually the picture was of not actually a real runner, and was from 5 years ago. So this wasn't the current runner, representing today's running community. It was just a random shot.
Sorry, Sonny, can I just jump in? Sorry, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Basically, the information I just want to add a bit more context to it, because the person on the cover is a friend, so I'm a bit sort of confused about how I say this really. But basically, they are quite a well-known runner in a different country. But basically, what happened is Runner's World went into their archives and they used an image from like 5 years ago, and it was almost like a tokenism sort of aspect. So I mentioned that to Sabrina. I think Sabrina then kind of went forward. So yeah, for me, it's a tricky situation because obviously it's a friend of mine, so I kind of don't want to sort of say you shouldn't be on the cover. But at the same time, I think Runners World kind of did acknowledge that it was a bit of lazy journalism from their side. And in fairness, though, I mean, their team, we've spoken to the team, and they've done a lot since, and it seems to be sort of moving forward in the right direction. So, look, we all kind of do things that we kind of question, but I mean, they've definitely done some good things moving forwards.
It sounds like it's been a learning experience on their side, and that Runners World are making some progress with what they've learned from the experience, which I guess is the best thing you could possibly take from that situation.
Yeah, we entirely understand the issue for many organisations in that we're learning and they're learning, but they're learning from a lower base in many ways. We've had a lot of people contacting us in the last several weeks, and some of those contacts are basically read your posts, seen some of the stuff that you're talking about. What can I do to help? Or I run an events company, and we don't have any or many black runners. I've looked at our sort of images, and I haven't got any pictures of black runners. How do I get some? I mean, it's stuff at that kind of level, which in one way seems a bit silly, but we absolutely understand it. How why would someone in the Lake District, where very, very few black people live, who have been organising trail races or fell races, which by definition, as we've come to realise, are almost entirely white, where would they have got pictures of black trail runners from without proactively going out there and seeking them out themselves, and maybe trying to get black runners to their events, and consciously doing that. So we're seeing some of that happening now, but it needs to happen more, definitely, before we see a kind of permanent shift, if you like, into a kind of more equal representation for people.
I think we don't really go down that sort of route of like the tokenism as well, to be honest. I think that's what we're also trying to not fall into, that sort of trap of just having a random black person on from somewhere else on that site. So
I see what you mean. Like, it's defeating the object for them to go out and rip an image of a runner off Getty Images and stick it on their website. That's not the point.
What we're trying to do here is not increase representation for the sake of it. What we're actually trying to do is change the nature of the sport, and that's of course what partly makes it uncomfortable for people as well, because this is a sport that they may well be invested in and have been so for many years. They like what it is, they like the way it is, and by nature, as humans, we're not that keen on change a lot of the time, and so when we're saying, what we're telling you is that the sport 5 years from now should look and be different to the sport that it is now. Because one of the things that I don't think people realise is that, if we do get more black runners into trail running, the nature of trail running will change somewhat. Why wouldn't it? But it won't change for the worse. It will change for the better. So it's interesting where, if we sort of look in broader society, white society is quite happy to co-opt black culture into aspects of its experience when it suits them. So, want to be a singer, want to be a sports person, want to be a footballer, want to be a dancer. Come on in, that's fine. But come onto our fells and run our trails, not so much. We quite like them the way they are. So, I think there has to be a recognition that, things will change. I kind of liken it to, and I understand why it's difficult, because I liken it to cricket. I love cricket, and I worked in cricket for a few years, and I'm a traditionalist when it comes to cricket. I love test matches. I think they are the highest form of sporting theatre. I can just about handle one-day internationals, but T20s, the 100, to me, that's not really cricket. I can't really deal with the IPL and stuff like that. But that's me speaking from the heart. Whereas my head knows that, there's a commercial imperative there. Things are going to change, blah, blah, blah. And I know that helps bring people into the sport. So I know what it feels like to see something that you really value and feels really traditional, being kind of threatened with change in some way, and being asked to do things differently. But you have to, I think we have to recognize that where that is around something as, frankly, morally straightforward as treating people from different races the same, and them having the same opportunities. It's there's no argument. It's you have to embrace that. We can't be living in the 1950s. We can't be living in frankly, the 1850s in some respects. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help facilitate that change. We're trying to be that change, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible for the people, for runners and for the people who are organizing running events to get involved in that change. I mean, one of the other things, of course, which is an interesting issue, is that clearly there are a fair number of black trail runners, but we haven't yet met a black trail run organizer. I haven't anyway, and I don't think none of us know of any. So none of the race directors or event organizers that we have spoken to, none of them are black. And that, again, is a really good indication of where the power in the community lies. And of course, power is what's at the root of sort of racial inequality. And again, that's kind of an analogy. You can have an analogy with other sports. If you look at football, there are loads of black footballers, but there are very, very, very few black football managers, and even fewer black football club owners. That tells you where the power lies. And I was quite interested in. I'm sorry to keep going on, just jumping from one thing to another, but I was quite interested in your point about the sort of people who went on to MAM Tour and held up their banner. So I'm reading at the moment about how about the ownership of the land in the UK and in the national parks, etc. And one of the things which is true, which some people would find surprising, is how few people own most of the country. So if you go somewhere like the South Downs Way, which I've run in and is a beautiful part of the countryside, a national park, it's I think 50% of it is owned by 12 people.
Wow.
Now, that in itself is a fairly surprising fact. But what's interesting beyond that is that, of course, some of those people, their family has owned it for centuries. Close to 1,000 years in some cases. In pretty much all cases as far as I'm aware, those people are not black. So our countryside is owned by white people. Now, does that mean that black people can't go there? No, of course not. But could you imagine that group of people that you talked about unfurling their banner on top of MAM Tour if MAM Tour was owned by a black landlord? No,
yes,
they
I see
wouldn't be
what
able
you mean.
to do that.
No, not at all.
Can you imagine if a group of black protesters went up there and unfurled a Black Lives Matter banner on top of MAM Tour, what the response would be? I'm pretty sure that it would be a different response. I have no idea who owns MAM Tour, but I'm pretty sure that it's not a black person. So that again, that's not what's affecting people directly day by day, but it's a good indication of the kind of system that we're operating in, and that none of us can simply escape from. The fact is that if I'm running through the countryside and I look like I'm doing something a bit weird, no one is going to assume that I'm running on my own land, because I won't be. Whereas if you went out there and did that, it's possible that it could be your land. Someone who looks like you could be the owner. that's a slightly different perception, and that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with here.
Well, we've talked a little bit about race organisers here and what race organisers could maybe do different going forwards. What about, only a small handful of the people listening to this are likely to be other race organisers. If you are just a trail runner out there at the moment, what can you be thinking about? What can you be doing differently to try and facilitate this change?
I think you just need to look locally. I mean, just because you could be a trail runner, you could be a race organizer, but you just have to work within the sphere that you're working in. And it's conversations I've had with other people where you can challenge your own perceptions of maybe your own biases. You can look at your club and you can think, are we making it more open, diverse? Could I maybe be sort of sharing my skills as we talked about? I mean, especially the internet now with, Zoom and things like that. I mean, we're speaking to different companies, and that's one of the options we're looking at doing in terms of sort of getting those skills out there. It's more, you don't have to be massive and powerful to have an impact. Everyone's got a voice, and you interact with people, and you can make an influence on the people in your environment, and then hopefully then they can sort of meet others and sort of carry that forward. So we can all do better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sonny, I imagine you'd agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think individual runners can influence bigger organizations as well. As a lecturer in business, I often talk about stakeholder management, and businesses are influenced by different groups of stakeholders, and a really important group in this case is the runners, because they're the money, they're the ones providing the entrance fees. So I know that if Black Trail Runners writes to a race and says, can you please collect ethnicity data, they could ignore us. But if several hundred individual runners write to them and say, look, I was thinking of entering your race, but you don't seem that interested in this particular issue, so I'm not going to, then they would probably sit up and take notice. And so one of the things that we certainly are trying to do is, those people who are following us online and things, is encourage them to speak out on the same issues. It goes back to what Marcus was saying, that it's not enough to just be silently non-racist. What's important is to be vocally anti-racist, and to use your own voice to make the change that you want to happen. I think the other thing that I would add to that is that people can do whatever they can to kind of educate themselves about the issues as well. Whether that's listening to discussions like this, whether it's about reading books, whether it's about seeing films like the one that the 13th that Marcus mentioned. There's lots of stuff out there that will improve people's knowledge of the situation and give them ammunition's the wrong word, but give them arguments that they can use when they are confronted with either acts of overt or indirect racism, or with people who refuse or can't understand. I'm doing this myself. I try and read stuff about this so that I'm getting more familiar with what some of the typical arguments against what we're doing might be, so that I'm in a position to be able to counter them, and do so in a way which is likely to be effective. One of the problems that we have is that for reasons that we kind of touched on, people get really defensive about it. This is a topic of conversation which people find really difficult, and a common response is just simply to shut down and walk away, and that's not helpful. And so, even though it galls us a little bit, we've kind of got to couch our discussions and our arguments in a way which doesn't trigger that, if at all possible. That's difficult and that's hard work. And so the more people who can sort of join in with that work, the easier it becomes, right? If I'm the only person in the room who's going to put their hand up and saying, look, that was an inappropriate thing to say, that's hard for me to do. But if I know that 3 or 4 other people are going to do the same thing, problem solved. So be an ally, be supportive, educate yourself, and doesn't have to be a huge action. Take small actions. Lots of people do that. It builds up to something, right?
We've had some good
Fantastic.
stuff as well on our sort of comments as well, where people make other companies aware. Are you aware of Black Trail Runners, or are you aware of this, or aware of that? And that's one person. So I mean, you don't have to be a big organization to make an impact. And I think as long as it's coming from a place of like respect, then I think you'll be more likely to be heard, rather than kind of being too offensive.
Well, if our listeners out there now, and I really hope they are, if guys have been listening to this and they're now thinking, I'm ready to have this uncomfortable conversation, whether they're an organizer or a runner or whoever they are, where would I steer them to have that conversation with you guys? Where should they be looking now?
So our main channel that we're using with people at the moment, we've got an Instagram account, which is Black Trail Runners, and people contact us directly through that. And anyone who does contact us directly, we will get back to them. And we do have a website. It is still in the process of being built, but there is a contact form on there. People can write to us on that as well. We're more than happy to hear from them. And we're happy to send people some information on just some basic things that they can do. So please do get in contact with us. And I think individually we're all open to these discussions as well. So we're all represented on social media. I'm guessing that this podcast has show notes or something like that.
Yes,
so
there is.
So we could, obviously share some of those details with you. And if people want to do that, then that's great.
Yep, perfect. You ping those across, and I'll make sure they're in the description and stuff wherever I put this up. And I think on that note, guys, it just remains for me to say thank you. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation with me today. I've really appreciated it. And I look forward to having more conversations with you guys as someone in the industry doing what I do, which is telling stories and representing these races. It's been a very important learning experience for me, and may that learning experience continue. So thanks, guys. Thank you for this.
Thanks for the opportunity, Will.
No worries, guys. And look, enjoy the rest of your days. Sonny, have a great race at the weekend. I hope it goes really well for you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks.